Of course, we continue to bring you the latest coming out of KZN. And like I was saying just before that break, we heard from Premier Sihle Zikalala a lot more clarity in as far as the responses that are going to be provided by government are concerned. Sihle Zikalala saying to that media briefing that the death toll from the floods has now risen to 443. He's blamed the recent bad weather for halting rescue operations in that province. Zikalala also adding that the number of people officially reported missing now stands at 63.
In terms of the search and rescue mission, the current inclement weather has slowed our assessment and rescue operations on the ground. But we are once again back in the full swing. As of this morning, KwaZulu-Natal received 38 call-outs, and on the scenes that were attended, 6 bodies were recovered. We stand at approximately 63 persons missing or unaccounted for. The death toll now stands at 443.
Zikalala further revealed that the provincial government is pushing for a national disaster to be declared.
The provincial government resolved to ask the national government to consider a review and perhaps investigate whether this disaster should not be declared as a national disaster. We say this with humility and understanding that our president and ministers have been the first on the ground with us, and in surveying the damage they have witnessed, the level of required response.
Let's take you now to somebody who was in the room during the time of this briefing, Senior Reporter Ziyanda Ngcobo, who's also been covering the floods for us in eThekwini and in Durban. Ziyanda, good evening. I think let's just start then with what we're looking at here, which is an increasing number of fatalities. And unfortunately, the heroic work that has come from EMS and rescue officials also claiming the life of one of those officials.
Certainly, Kathy, and you know, the briefing by KZN Premier Sihle Zikalala giving a comprehensive report then in terms of the interventions that they're currently making, from social development to human settlements, roads and infrastructure as well. And I think the most critical thing that was highlighted right at the beginning of the briefing by the Premier is that they are asking that National declare that what has happened in KwaZulu-Natal, as that death toll continues to rise, to declare this a national state of disaster, because he says that practically speaking this would mean that national departments would be able to work closely with them in terms of the relief efforts. In no ways does he say, does this mean that the province does not have the situation under control, but it does require an extra pair of hands from various ministries who he has acknowledged, some of which have been on the ground with them, but saying that really at this stage, this tragedy has surpassed that of 1987. And really education, for an example, they're trying to ensure that after the Easter break that schools will resume having mobile schools. From the Department of Health side, as we anticipate more deaths to be announced, they're saying that the national and provincial departments of health are working together and are doing post-mortems at quite a rapid pace, albeit, you know, if you speak to some of the undertakers and owners of funeral parlors, they will tell you that this is exactly where the backlog lies in terms of being able to release bodies. When we talk about roads and infrastructure, the Premier spoke about having a river line, if I remember the term correctly, to ensure that no structures are built along riverbanks, and that there has been a team that's been assembled to identify these areas and to firstly go back to areas that are in the most danger currently. When we talk about relief efforts, the humanitarian crisis, the social development department, we know that the Deputy Minister is in town. The Minister is coming later later this week, but also food parcels are going to be distributed. 1,900 rand will be distributed for groceries for the burial of those who've lost their loved ones, but there is money that has been allocated by the provincial treasury to assist with the burial. Very important, Kathy, something that I'm sure you've seen on social media and that is being discussed is the concern and the levels of mistrust that have been displayed towards the KZN government about whether or not these relief funds will be spent properly and really provide the necessary, social support, socio-economic support to those who've been affected. Well, the Premier says a team to monitor will be has been assembled, that the provincial treasury, once all the assessments have been done in terms of the damage, which has been quantified so far to be at around 10 billion, then the provincial auditors will assess all the contracts before they're being released, and that the Auditor General is likely to come after. Now, you'll recall that during COVID-19, there were teams by the AG's office that were working, were monitoring at a much faster pace in terms of they were there and a part of the process right at the beginning. So it will be very interesting to see where those monies go, and really there are calls, strong calls, that transparency throughout the entire process.
For much of this weekend, Ziyanda, we've seen the authorities focus on search and rescue operations. At this point, do we know when that will change and if it's likely to change anytime soon, given the official number that has been given of missing people? But an important point that you also raised in that briefing, that the number of missing people could be way higher than 63.
Yeah, let me start off with that point about the missing people, because I asked the Premier to explain the methodology that they're using, and he explained that from a ward and councillor level, they're getting reports there, and as well from the police stations. And this is how the question of, councillors who are MIA actually came about. But you see, the problem is there may be people who are missing, but it hasn't necessarily been reported to authorities, which is why then, I was saying that I get a sense that this number could very well be much higher. And so to respond to your question then, regarding whether or not we're moving towards search and recovery as opposed to search and rescue, the Premier said that in the last 48 hours that they have still been focusing on rescue missions. But I mean, if you speak to the disaster management teams on the ground, which we've been doing as Newzroom Afrika, they'll tell you that hope is fast dissipating, and they are now moving towards then, recovery efforts. And this is also what we've been seeing in communities that have taken matters into their own hands, that are picking up their spades, coming together as residents to try these and get to the bottom of these recovery efforts, because at this point, it's more about getting closure when it comes to seeing an actual corpse and burying your loved ones, than it is about having any hope that they will be alive, given the fact that the heavy downpours landed on Monday evening.
Ziyanda Ngcobo, we're going to leave it there for now. We'll bring you more of then that coordinated effort and further details of what exactly it is that will be given to all the families affected by these floods.